49 machines crawled toward the German wire in the first grey light. And the question riding on every one of them was brutal and simple. Could a machine finally do what 2 years and 1,000,000 men could not? Could it cross 100 yards of open ground and live? By nightfall, most of them sat dead in the mud, ditched or stalled. But one of them did something that morning that made the British High Command order 1,000 more before the week was out. Hold on to that.
This is Professor Erica. If you followed this series, you already know the ground these armies dug into. Barbed wire, machine guns, and artillery had turned the space between the trenches into a place you simply could not walk across and survive.
Think of it like a locked door. Hey everyone, Maya here. For 2 years, the generals threw men at that door, and the door kept winning. Thousands of lives a day, and the line barely moved.
Hi all, I'm Leo. So what breaks a door you can't push through? You don't push harder. You build something that carries its own way across.
That was the whole idea. An armored box on caterpillar tracks, thick enough to shrug off rifle and machine gun fire, that could climb the parapet, flatten the wire, and cross a trench a man could not.
Look at the map, and you can see exactly where they decided to test it. Flers and Courcelette, 2 villages tucked behind the German line on the Somme, in September 1916.
Look at the ground itself. Men pinned in a hole while the shells come down, and open dirt in front of them that kills anything that stands up.
Here's the question this whole day gets stuck on. If those first tanks barely worked, why do we call this the day that changed war? That's what we're settling today.
Take that with you, because the honest answer is that both halves are true at once. Now let me take you back to how a weapon this strange got built without a single enemy ever hearing about it.
Long before a tank reached a battlefield, the British had to win a stranger fight. Building hundreds of a weapon no one had ever seen in total secrecy, with the enemy never hearing a whisper. Here's the record. In February 1915, the government set up the Landships Committee. The push came from an officer named Ernest Swinton. The muscle came from Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty.
And that's the man himself. Swinton spent months arguing that an armoured vehicle could carry its own road across the wire, back when most senior officers thought the idea was a toy.
Can I say why I love this part? I like being early to the future, and this was the future arriving a decade too soon. The first working try was a tracked box they nicknamed Little Willie, built in the autumn of 1915.
That's Little Willie right there, the one that survives today. Squint at it, and you can see a tank trying to be born. The next design, finished in January 1916, was the real thing. They called it Mother.
So here's what I never understood. How do you hide a thing this big? What did they tell the factory workers they were building?
A water tank. That's the whole cover story. Britain hid the deadliest weapon of the war behind a lie about buckets.
Okay, that's good, and it's real. The hull shipped labelled water carrier for Mesopotamia to fool German spies. The workers said tank. The disguise word stuck. That is the name we still use 100 years later.
Here's the number to hold because it matters later. Foster's and the other works built only 150 Mark I's ever. About 50 of those shipped to France for the attack. Everything else was still on a factory floor. That was the entire first generation of tanks on Earth.
150 in the whole world?
In the whole world. Remember that, because it's about to change how you feel about what one general did with them.
Real quick, because this next part matters to you. If any of this is helping, tap that like button, then hit subscribe and ring the bell so the next one finds you. Both are free and take about a second, but they tell the algorithm to show this to one more person who needs it.
So what was a Mark I actually like up close? Let me show you the real thing before we climb inside. There it is, a Mark I in profile. That long gun out the side spunson makes this one a male tank.
Two kinds rolled out that autumn. A male carried two 6-pounder guns to smash strong points. A female carried only machine guns to cut down infantry in the open.
And how fast? Be honest.
3.7 miles an hour, flat out, on good ground. Over shell holes, far slower. A fit man could walk beside it.
28 tons of steel moving slower than you stroll to lunch.
Here's the exact thing I was dodging earlier, and it deserves a straight answer.
At walking pace, why couldn't the Germans just shoot the crew? Erica, that's the whole point of the armor, isn't it?
It is the steel-stopped rifle and machine gun bullets, the two things that had murdered every attack before it. A field gun firing straight could still kill it. Small arms could not.
Now count the crew. Erica, run the numbers one by one.
One commander, who also worked the brakes. One driver.
Wait, 2 men just for the gears?
2 gearsmen, because steering took a whole team. Then 4 gunners on the weapons.
So 8 men sealed into one steel box.
And here's the part I didn't know until this week. Inside, it hit 122 degrees. The air went thick with engine fumes and carbon monoxide. Men passed out at the controls.
Okay, that changes how I picture this. I was imagining a fortress. That's an oven that fights back.
And no radio at all. To send an order out, the crew opened a little hatch and let a carrier pigeon fly. That was the whole communication suite. A bird in a steel box.
A steel oven at walking pace. 8 men choking inside. Orders sent out by bird.
And at dawn on the 15th of September, the army drove exactly that into the German line. Let's go to Flers. Dawn, Friday the 15th of September, 1916. For the first time in history, tanks go into battle. And the honest story of that morning is stranger than the legend.
That's one of them, on the Somme that autumn. A mail tank, C-19, with the anti-grenade roof and the little steering tail wheels the first tanks dragged behind them.
The numbers here get argued about, so I want someone who lives in the first tank crews. Let me bring in Colin Reeve. Colin, are you on the line?
I'm here. And the first thing to say is that mechanically that morning was a shambles. A beautiful, historic shambles. 49 tanks were earmarked for the attack. Only 32 even reached the start line. The rest broke down or ditched before they fired a shot.
So a third were gone before the whistle.
Gone before the whistle. Of the 32, about 18 actually got into the fight. And by most honest accounts, only around 9 pushed on ahead of the infantry and did real damage.
And I'll add one caveat, because the sources genuinely disagree. One scholarly reference counts 31 as crossing the German lines. So the exact tally is fuzzy. The shape of it is not. Most of them failed.
But now the other half. One tank, D-17, a male commanded by a young lieutenant named Stuart Hasty, crushed the wire, crossed the trench and drove straight into the village of Flers. A pilot flying overhead sent back a message that went around the world. A tank is walking down the high street of Flers with the British Army cheering behind. That crew, being Scots, had nicknamed her Dinnikin. It means, I don't know. That's the piece I'd leave you with. The failures that morning weren't the whole story. One tank, one lieutenant, walking into a village proved the idea could fight. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Colin. Stay warm out there, and there it is. The thing I promised you up top, the one machine that changed everything. It wasn't that the tanks won the day. It's that one of them proved the idea could work at all. Within a week, High Command ordered 1,000 more.
And look, you're right, the machines mostly failed. I'll give you that completely. But that's the wrong scoreboard. The question isn't did they win the battle, it's did the Germans, watching a steel monster walk out of the smoke, ever feel safe in a trench again?
This is where I'm going to fight you both.
Hold that fight for one more minute, Maya, because it deserves its own room. This is what that ragged little advance looked like when the machine actually worked. So here is what's actually at stake tonight. Get this call wrong, and you either waste the biggest surprise of the war, or you throw away the men who crewed a weapon that wasn't ready. Maya thinks Haig spent something precious for almost nothing. Leo thinks he did the only thing that ever gets a new weapon built. Maya, open us.
Surprise is a card you play once. And Haig played the tank on a narrow, muddy corner of the Somme for a couple of villages and burned it forever.
You're describing a war he was already losing. He didn't have next year. The Somme was killing thousands of men a week right then.
So wait for hundreds of them and win something that matters. A year later at Cambrai, they massed nearly 500 and tore a hole miles wide. That is what the tank could do. Haig showed the Germans the trick before he had enough to use it.
None of that Cambrai number exists without someone going first.
One number nobody said out loud yet, and it complicates both of you. That September morning, only 150 tanks existed in the entire world. Haig gambled 49 of them, a third of every tank on Earth, in one wet dawn.
A third of them, exactly. My point stands. You cannot perfect a weapon you never fire. The breakdowns, the heat, the ditching, you only learn those by fighting. Flers is why Cambrai worked.
Tell that to the crews who cooked inside.
I'm not dismissing them. I'm saying their failures wrote the manual that saved the crews who came after.
Leo, answer her strongest version, not a soft one. Wait 1 year and you'd have 500 tanks and total surprise at Cambrai instead of a spent card. Why isn't she just right?
Because the surprise wasn't as spent as it sounds. The Germans knew tanks existed after Flers, sure. They still had no answer for them at Cambrai 14 months later.
And Maya, your real objection isn't the timing. It's that men were spent to teach a lesson a test range could have taught. This was fixable in a workshop, and instead it was…
No, not fixable in a workshop. That's the thing. A test range gives you a clean field. It never gives you a real trench under a real barrage with a terrified 19-year-old at the gears. Some of this you only learn where it costs.
Then source it for me, both of you. Where does the verdict actually land?
Britannica's blunt about it. Only 49 were available, and their success was limited. Then, quote, on November 20th, 1917, 474 British tanks were concentrated at Cambrai and achieved a spectacular breakthrough.
And I'll concede the half I have to. The order for 1,000 more came within a week. So Flers bought the program, even if it didn't buy the ground.
So here's my verdict, and I'll own it. Maya is right that the tactical surprise was spent cheap, and the record backs her. But Leo has the strategic verdict, and history sided with him. You cannot mass-produce a weapon the generals don't believe in yet, and Flers is what made them believe. A shambles that bought 1,000 tanks and, 1 year on, the breakthrough at Cambrai. That's the consequence, and that's where I land.
So what did that muddy, half-broken morning actually buy? Not a victory. Flers planted a seed, and what grew from it changed how wars are fought.
14 months later, the leap. At Flers, 49 tanks, and most died in the mud. At Cambrai, 474, massed on firm ground chosen for them. The trend never stopped there. More tanks, faster tanks, until the tank was the point of the spear.
But be careful how you tell the Cambrai story. It wasn't clean.
That's exactly right, and I'll push on anyone who calls Cambrai a clean triumph. The tanks tore the hole. They were too slow and too short range to hold it, and the Germans took most of the ground back within days.
So give me the source before I overclaim it.
Britannica, straight. The tanks at Cambrai were too slow and had too short an operating range to exploit the breakthrough. So here's the whole arc. Flers was a mechanical failure that proved a mechanical idea. Cambrai was a breakthrough that proved tanks needed to be faster and go farther. Each ragged step wrote the requirement for the next design. You field the flawed thing, then you fix it fast, and by 1918 the tank had genuinely reshaped how armies attacked. That settles it. The failures weren't the detour. The failures were the design process.
That's what those crews at Flers bought, not a win. By 1918, the tank had reshaped how armies attack, and every crew after them got the manual. Every lesson paid for in that mud became a line in someone else's training.
I collect first edition paperbacks, and I keep catching myself treating Flers like one. Rough and full of errors, and worth everything, because it's the thing every later copy was printed from. Here's the one line to keep. The first tanks didn't win a battle. They proved a machine could cross the ground that had killed a generation, and that idea never went back in the box. From one shambles in the mud came the shape of every war that followed. Before I run it back, try to name the one number that would settle the whole debate for you. Here's mine. On the 15th of September, 1916, 49 tanks went in. Only about 9 did real fighting, and within a week the army ordered 1,000 more. A shambles that bought the future.
And next time we go under the waves, the other war Germany almost won, the U-boat campaign that nearly starved Britain out in a single spring. Wait until you see how close it got.
If you take one thing from these crews, take this. The people who go first almost never get the clean win. They get the scars, and everyone after them gets the map.
My favorite detail of the whole episode is still a Scottish tank crew accidentally naming their machine, I don't know.
If this is your kind of history told with the real numbers and not the legend, subscribe and like the video so the next chapter finds you. It genuinely helps this series keep going, and here's the one I can't answer for you. If you'd been Haig that autumn, bleeding thousands a week, would you spend your secret at Flers, or hold it for the perfect day that might never come? The first tanks lost the battle and won the century. This is Isabella, thanks for watching and signing off.
That was the real deal, Isabella. 9 out of 10, and the only reason I did not cry is I am on camera. This is Professor Erica, thanks for watching and signing off.